And then I'm going to go in here and I will highlight me so we can see everything. And my Zoom US has changed their interface. So I've got to figure out how to get my full picture back here. It looks different today than it did last week. There we go. So I'm back to seeing what I should see. So the first pattern I'm going to tie is an emerger pattern. And I was searching the net and I found this thing called a shuttlecock emerger, which would probably work for mayflies. And if you want to get down to very small sizes, it would work for chironomids as well. So basically, it's a thread body with some flash on it and a rib and a little bit of glue. And when I first started with a CDC wing and a little bit of dubbing for the thorax, originally when I started looking at this thing, I tied it up with, as I saw in the video, I tied it up with thread and put the rib on, and then they used UV set glue to give it a translucent appearance. When I first did that, what happened was the UV set glue darkened up all of the material quite a bit. So I decided I would do it a little differently. I would tie the body before I did the wing and the thorax and cover that with Sally Hansen's to preserve the color. And then after that's set, then I put the UV glue on it. And then when that's all done, I can put the thorax and the wing. So that's the process I'm going to use. So I'm going to take this out and I'll show you that this is kind of what the finished guy looks like before I get to the thorax. And you see there's a little bit of flash on the back. And I'm going to tie it in the version that uses the yellow ribbing. I think it brightens the color up a little bit. So that's the version I'm going to do. And I'll tie the wings on this completed version later. So the first thing is to select the hook. And I'm tying these on a fairly good size hook because you guys need to see it. But I discovered that all hooks are not the same. We were talking, Florin and I were talking this. This one here that looks to be thinner wire and smaller, this one at the back here, that's actually a number 10. That's a number 10 Czech Nymph and buzzer. That's a Hanak 330 BL. This one that's a heavier wire and looks to be just a slightly bit bigger is actually a size 12, and it's a Hanak 300 BL that has a little heavier wire. It's an original Czech Nymph hook. That's what I'm going to tie on, mostly so you can see it. So we'll get that in the vise, and I'm using my midge jaws today because I need to get access around the very back of the bend of the hook. Now, you could tie this a lot simpler than what I'm going to do, but I like to, after a little pissing around, I like the process that I use seems to work well for getting things done in the right order. So I've got red thread. It's 8/0 standard tying thread. And I'll start it a little bit behind the eye. I don't have to be all the way up the front. And I'll wrap this down because I find that to get a nice even body and keep things from twisting around the shank, it helps a lot if you have a good thread underbody to start with. And also I think what it does is it covers up the color of the shank so that when you put the Sally Hansen's on, the dark color of the shank doesn't show through. I'm going to wrap this right down around the bend. to basically the back of the hook. So that's the underbody with red thread. And that, I think, when I start putting Sally Hansen's on, it's not going to darken it up too much. Bring my thread up here. And I need to put the rib on first because it goes forward last. So I've got, this is a stripped quill that's been dyed. And I always leave a little tag end here, which I don't need. So what I'll do, if I can get my pliers to let go of the hook, I'll pin that tip off. And you'll see one of the things I've done, whenever I do this multiple wraps up the shank, I'll let my bobbin hang and spin counterclockwise when you're looking down from the top. Take some of the twist out of the thread so that when you do a loose wrap, the wrap falls in the right spot. Then I'll hold this on top of the hook and run it right back over top, touching turns all the way down to the back of the hook. Back down to where everything is going to end up at the very back end of the hook shank. And I'm going to try and keep that last couple of wraps. I'm going to try to keep the quill on the far side of the hook, just to keep it out of the way. Put it in my material clip. The next thing I'm going to put on for material, and by the way, this is the package that the quills come in. And you can get those in a variety of colors. I have an inventory of them. I don't know where you get them these days. So what I'm using next for flash on the back, you can probably do with a little bit wider stuff than I got. But I figured this would be good for the stuff I'm doing in smaller size, if you're going to do a real mid-sized one. This is really thin Flashabou. It's called, what is it here? It says Marabou Action Flashabou. And so that's what I'm going to do is a shiny back on the top of this thing. So I'll take a piece of this off. There. And then I'll wrap my thread forward. Again, I'm trying to make sure I have this underbody covered pretty well. And I'm trying to wrap forward almost in touching turns so I don't end up with too ragged a body. So I'll carefully wrap this up, the hook shank. And I'm going to take it all the way up to just behind the eye, sort of at the wing position. And at that point, I'll take the Flashabou, do a loose, well, I need to spin it first. If I spin it, the loop follows the corrector A. When I get that first loop down, I'll just suck the shiny stuff back so that I don't have to trim it off. And then I'll hold it on top of the hook shank again as I wrap all the way down to the back. And I'm trying to keep it on the top because I want that, again, I want that Flashabou to protect the color of the thread when I end up lacquering it down. Right back to where I have that quill tied in. And now I'll set that into the material clip. And I will wrap forward and try to gradually build a little bit of a taper to the body, which means just sometimes making a few extra wraps over top of them, ones that you just laid down. And I'll make sure that that covered up most of that. So you see, I'm just building a very slight taper. I don't make a big, thick body on this thing, but a very slight taper to what I'm tying here. And when I get to just by the point of the hook, I'll get my whip finisher and I will tie off the red thread. And cut it off. And that's the end of it for the red thread for the moment. Get my green thread. this is a two-tone chironomid. As chironomids hatch, they tend to, when they pupate, they tend to pull up into their shuck, and there's a little bit of bloodworm left at the bottom. And so they have, in some of those early hatching stages, they'll be a little red at the back, and then they'll be green or dark color further up. So that's why the two-tone. And I'm going to tie this on as green thread. And I will wrap back to right where the point of the hook hangs. And then I will build a body with thread all the way up to about an eye width behind the eye. So this is going to take a bit of wrapping with thread. And I'd like to try to keep a relatively smooth transition between the red and the green. So, and then build a little bit heftier as I get further forward. Don't want to overdo it, but okay. Then when I get that body shape, which is skinny at the back and a little thicker at the front, I'm going to take the Flashabou and I will pull it over the top and hold it on top of the body and bring my thread around and tie that down. Just the first gentle wrap and then a second gentle wrap, just with bobbin weight. And when I get that there, you'll see it's a little bit loose. The Flashabou is a little bit loose on the top. So I'm gonna, whoops, it didn't grab it, rats. Let's try again. One. Pinch wrap will help. My bobbin is a little too loose. Okay. Got to get that down onto the, this limp Flashabou is a little bit tricky to manage sometimes. It's still not down. Come on. There we go. I think I got it. Okay, I got it trapped now. So now what I do is I will manipulate the Flashabou right on top of the body, right on top of the body with my fingers. So you can see that I've got sitting right on the very top. And when I get there, I'll snug it up and do a couple of really good wraps at the eye, pull back one wrap and put a couple wraps there, and that should fix that in place. And at this point, I'm going to take my rib and I will wrap that around over top of the Flashabou. And I'm always going to have my finger there so that I don't push the Flashabou around over top of the material. Don't want to push it around the body. Get some nice even wraps here. And I'll probably need 5 or 6, maybe 7 wraps up the body. That did not go in. I like to make them as even as I can. If you were tying these in quantity, you'd want to do it a little faster than this. But then when I get to where the wing position is, I'll just bring my thread over, tie it down really good, and then pull it back and wrap in front of it to make sure it's on there securely. Trim it off. At this point, I'll take my whip finisher and I'll whip finish the green thread just behind the eye. Now, to keep the body material from being darkened up a whole bunch, I'm going to take my Sally Hansens and put a very thin coat on top of this body. Turn upside down. You see get a little blob there. That's why I turn the hook upside down. I want the blob to be on the top. And just take the last of it off with my finger. Now, at this point, it needs time to dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out of the hook and put it down to dry. There we go. So what do I do now? Well, I've got one that I've left for you to see. This is one that I did last night that has the body material is all done, and I've glued it. Yeah, I've glued it, but I haven't put anything on it yet. So now I take my UV set glue, and I will just come in here with it, and I will do a little teeny dab of UV set glue onto the top of this thing. And what this does is it fills the gaps in between the spiral wrap, and it provides a little smoother and a little more translucent body. I'll just adjust that around with my bodkin so that it's nice and smooth. And it will fill in many of those little gaps. And when I get it to that stage, I'll hold it upside down a bit. And I'll get my UV flashlight, and I will look it with the UV. Now this is hard enough that I can tie on top of it. It's solid enough, the UV will set it up pretty good. So there's a little extra thing here, but it preserves the body color, I think, to do it that way. Otherwise, if you just put the UV on, it kind of goes dark, quite dark. Now, reattach the green thread right behind the eye. I'll bring it back to what you would normally call on a dry fly the wing position. Now the wing on this guy is CDC called the canard, otherwise known as duck butt. And I've got some, and they're called puffs. So they're not the whole feather, they're just these little tiny fluffy things that have been pulled off the ass end of a duck. I have a few different colors. There's one that's just slightly pale, can't really see it there, pale light green. And I'll pick one of those out of the bucket here. And try to pick one that's not too fluffy and too long. So there it is. It's got this little point on it. These things have a little point on it. So they've just been plucked out of the duck. And I'll set that down on top there, and I will wrap around it like so. 1, 2, pull it up and wrap right in front of it. Now you can see that the wing, even with those wraps in front, tends to lean forward a little bit, and that's fine, because that is what you want. You want the wing to be not straight up from the hook shank, but a little forward, because you want this thing to sit at an angle in the water when it's sitting on the surface. And I've got a little bit of fine dubbing. And a lot of these guys these days like to fish these emergers with a little bit of orange around the gills that's in the body. So I've mixed up a little bit of orange and green dubbing. There you go. Just mix up a little batch of it. And I'll very lightly touch that onto the thread and make it skinny little dubbing rope here. I don't need a whole lot, just a few pinches, because I don't want to make a great big whacking piece of dubbing underneath there. Don't need a big thorax. So once I get it on the thread, I will come up, I will wrap behind and in front and behind and in front. Make a couple of wraps. Get my whip finisher out. Where did I put it? May have to do this by hand. Hold the CDC out of the way and 1, 2, 3, 4. Your whip finishes. Suck it in there. And trim the thread. And there you go. That's the end of it. So there's your CDC emerger pattern. A little bit complicated, but I think at the end of the day, the colors are well preserved. You get a fairly hefty body that will go down in the film, and yet the CDC will sit right on the top. And if you pick the right color, it'll be pretty visible when you're trying to fish that on the surface. So there you go. I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to stop the highlight. And we're back to going normal, I think. There.
Thank you, Dave.
So there you go.
CDC, you don't, that one you just shake the water out of it. You don't grease, right?
Yeah, you don't grease it. Yeah, it's really light. You don't want to put any weight on it because it won't float. You know, I've got a hefty enough body with all of that that glue and the UV stuff that it will not float well if you don't leave it alone. And it will dry out. You know, if you need to dry it out, you just cast it a couple of times and all the water comes out of that CDC. That because it's taken from the back end of the duck. The material comes from where the oil gland is on the duck. So it's impregnated with duck oil, which, why do you think ducks float? They have that oil in all of their feathers. So it really does help them float. There we go. So I see if I can.
Thank you. Let me
Okay.
Very nice, Dave.
Good.
all right, so well, Dave already explained the problem of hook sizes. Officially, this comes out of this little packet that says size 12. This hook is sold by under some brands. It's called a size 10. I have in this very same packet, I have bought on 2 different occasions the same hook, and there's a larger size like this one, and there's one size down. So it looks like even with the same label, you're not always sure you're gonna get the same hook. The bead is, this looks more credible. It's a 7/64. That's kind of the size that I like to have on a size 12 hook, typically. But, you know, it's a question of your preferences as well. You can go up one size on the bead. You can also go one size down, depending on what you're trying to do. Fishing in a lake, I think you can get by without messing around with tungsten. Brass beads are good enough because you typically use a sinking line. This is more of a river, stream kind of pattern where you want things to go deep down quickly and stay there and not be, you know, your descent of the fly not to be slowed down too much by the current, or I should say your fly drifting too far before it has a chance to sink anywhere. Okay, the other Ingredient here is hot pink thread. This is the 70 denier. You don't want something too thick. And Danville has a good selection of hot colors. Now the beads are slotted because they're easier to put on the hook, and you don't have to worry too much about what size hook and what size bead you have and what is the bend of the hook and all of that stuff. And they also end up sitting quite nicely at the head. They're a little bit more expensive depending on the hook you use. If you're not using jig hooks, non-slotted beads also work very well. Okay, so just get your thread on and move it back to the bend of the hook, where we're gonna put a few strands of Krystal flash. And here I did discover over time that Krystal flash is not just Krystal flash. There are two kinds out there. There's one that's a little finer fiber and limper, and there is some stuff that's a fair bit stiffer. And so for the smaller flies, I've been choosing the limper stuff. It comes out of an old package of Krystal flash gray ghost, but gray ghost, whatever, pearl, they all seem to look the same to me. So I don't think that's important. It's just some little flash there. Other colors will probably just work just as well. And what I do is I take one fiber and I fold it a couple of times. So I end up with 4 strands like this. I don't know if you can probably count the 4 strands. So now I take my 4 strands and I'm gonna tie them on at the bend of the hook. The other thing that I'm going to have handy on the desk, because I'm tying more than one fly, is one of these little guys. They're a bit of an antique. I don't know if you can still buy them, but they sure are very good because you can put the remaining material in the clamp and use it on the next fly. I get typically 2, 3, 4 flies out of one of those strands of Krystal flash. Okay, so let's attach this. I'm going to just do a little soft loop at the beginning and then gradually tighten and then move forward and try to control the Krystal flash so that it does go nicely along the hook, so I don't have to do any further trimming. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the thread back here and make sure that I have this Krystal flash where I want it to be. I go fairly deep down into the bend of the hook with it. Something like this. And I move the thread forward. I leave, I don't know if it really makes a big difference, but I like the looks of it. So I leave a little bit of a tag here. First, I'm going to trim the Krystal flash. I don't know, 2/3 of body length, maybe. And then the remaining material is ready to go for the next fly in the clip. So that goes on the desk. And now I'm going to use secret material. This thing is not what it says on the bobbin, of course. This comes from Dollarama, $1.25 for 30 meters of good stuff in 6 different colors, 5 meters each color. The missing colors here on the card are what I already put on old empty thread spools. And for these, it turns out that this purple color is pretty nice. We all know gold and silver patterns plenty. I think this red one probably would make some nice chironomids. And it's flat enough and fine enough that you can get by with it on a size 12 hook, and you get a decent looking body. I think going much smaller than probably 14 still works. So I just attach it here with one loop, and then I take the thread forward and I do the same thing as I did with a crystal flash. The ends of this have a tendency to split and unravel. So here the trick is, as you turn, as you see what's happening, is you loosen up a little bit the tension on the thread, and then you tighten gradually, and this way you can see the fibers get trapped and you don't have anything kind of sticking out perpendicular to the body. So I come to the end here, and I'm just going to use the rotary vise. I don't do knots and things most of the time. It's not needed, and with the bead at the head of the hook, it's going to create problems actually. So just let the thread hang if you have a rotary vise, and then, you know, if you pulled enough thread off the bobbin, it's okay. You're going to get a few more wraps of thread behind the bead where there is a big gap usually anyway, so that's not an issue. So when you get here to the end, just make sure that the thread doesn't get back behind the ribbing, the tinsel. Secure with 2 wraps behind, move the thread, a couple of wraps up front, and then trim. So there's your body, and you can see it's nice and smooth. So I think I haven't tried size 14 hooks, but I think I can do bodies on size 14s. This is hollow, so you could also pull it over the hook, but it unravels quite easily. So I've tried a couple of times, and doesn't seem to me to be a very good idea. Okay, now to finish the fly, I'm just going to do a collar of fritz. And I have some fluorescent pink here from one manufacturer, and I have a fluorescent color here from another manufacturer. So there's, kind of 2 tones of pink. I'm going to do one with the lighter pink now. I've tied a bunch with the other color as well. I think the pattern that I took a photo of and sent it over to Dave yesterday was with the darker pink. So I attach this. This is like working with this is a bit like working with chenille. You want to strip a little bit of the core at the front. And now I think opinions are divided on what to do with this. Some people like to twist the fritz in order to get a bushy kind of egg-like thing. I like mine tied as more like a wet fly collar. So what I do is I take the chenille and I pull on the fibers, just like folding hackle basically, right? So, and you can see this thing, just the moment you look at it, it starts twisting on you. So it's pretty annoying that way. But just don't lose patience, just keep on going. Make sure that the thread stays in front of your fritz when you're doing this. And don't overdo it, or overdo it depending on what kind of effect you're looking for. 2 or 3 turns max will give you plenty of fluff here and enough action, I think, in the water as well. Okay. And then secure with 2-3 turns of thread over the fritz, and then move the thread forward right behind the bead. So there's always a little gap there that needs filling. And trim this. And the fly is almost done. Now I just need to do basically a whip finish. I'm going to pull on the fibers so they don't get trapped by the thread. Pull everything back, do several covering wraps here. At this point, you've got enough material, you've got enough thread here so that the bead is solidly pushed against the eye of the hook so nothing moves anywhere. And it's time for the whip finish tool. There we go. Still have fibers sticking up. Do one whip finish. and then do a second one. And that's the beauty of using thinner thread on even a relatively large fly, because it'll allow you to just do more wraps without doing any sort of overly bulky head. And that's the thing. Like I said, this is a composite of things that I've seen here and there and everywhere. And I don't have a name for it, but it does seem to catch fish. So I'm tying myself a bunch of them in different colors. This seems to be, I was afraid that for whitefish, this would be too big. And it turned out it wasn't. But here it is.
I
And
think
on the same idea, one can try to do egg patterns. And I'm just going to show you something that I'm not going to tie today. But stuff that I did with some of this fritz stuff. So this is what I thought would be more appropriate for whitefish. And yes, it does work with whitefish. And I also did catch one bull trout with this kind of thing. So this works. And to show you for comparison purposes, this is what a similar fly tied with standard egg yarn looks like.
mhm.
And these are size 14 curved hooks. I think these are the 3X heavy from Togans. They're a heavier version of the Tiemco 2457, which is the heavy wire. So here, you know, just like a standard bead, a 7/64 or this one is a 3/32, because this is a smaller fly.
Florin, how do you fish them?
Under a bobber, and as close to the bottom as I can get them, which is easier. So when I was fishing these things recently, I was fishing them in relatively slow water, except for one spot where I switched to the tungsten one because of the current was heavier. So this one helped me get the fish from out of there. But in the slower water, even the smaller ones with a brass bead would have enough time to sink down. And the challenge will be greater or lesser depending on where you're fishing and whether you're allowed or not allowed to have other weights on the line. So the trick with fishing the small ones is usually having, in Alberta, you can fish 2 hooks. So I would just use a big heavy nymph and tie to the bend of the hook a piece of tippet and then tie the little one. In BC, we're restricted to 1 hook. I would use something else for a weight and then a short length of tippet. And, you know, when I say weight is fly castable weight, you know, not a big
whack
lump.
you in the back of the head, wait.
not a lump of lead, no. And in sections with fly fishing only, silk lines allowed kind of stuff, I don't know, because there you wouldn't be allowed bobbers either. So
Mhm.
you tell me what to do in those waters, because I